Russia, 2001. The Architecture of New Power. In 2001, Russia was undergoing a tectonic shift. It was a year of calculated risks, the dismantling of old media empires, and the birth of a new political era. 1. Geopolitics: Slovenia, Bush, and the Great Deal. In 2001, Putin attempted to integrate Russia into the Western world on his own terms. The Ljubljana Summit, June 16th. This was more than just a first meeting. Putin brought a massive dossier to prove to George W. Bush that Russia was a reliable partner. Bush was famously struck by the Russian leader's directness, stating he had looked into his soul. It was a moment when it seemed the Cold War was finally buried for good. September 11th, and the call to the White House. Putin was the first foreign leader to reach Bush after the strikes on the towers. He didn't just offer condolences, he ordered a halt to all strategic nuclear exercises so the Americans wouldn't be nervous, and he opened Russian airspace for NATO humanitarian cargo. The closure of Lourdes and Cam Ran. This was Putin's personal initiative, and it infuriated the old military brass. The Signals Intelligence Center in Cuba, Lourdes, allowed Russia to listen to almost the entire U.S. East Coast. Its closure in October 2001 was presented as cost-cutting, but in reality, it was the price paid for Russia to be recognized as a legitimate player in the West. 2. Nuclear parity and the Topol-M. In 2001, the focus shifted heavily toward the strategic missile forces. Deployment of the Topol-M. In 2001, a new regiment of silo-based Topol-M missiles went on combat duty in Tatishevo. These were the first missiles developed entirely in Russia without Ukrainian components. Their key feature was the ability to bypass any prospective U.S. missile defense system, the very system Washington announced it was withdrawing from in December. Liquidation of the scalpels. Simultaneously, following the START treaties, Russia continued to dismantle its unique Molodets rail-mobile missile complexes. These were the ghost trains that the Americans feared most because they were nearly impossible to track via satellite. The ABM Treaty. In December, the United States officially notified Russia of its withdrawal from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Putin called it a mistake, but used the moment to greenlight the development of hypersonic weapons. 3. The death of a legend, the Mir Space Station. On March 23, 2001, the world witnessed the symbolic end of the Soviet era in space. The Mir Station was launched on February 20, 1986, as the world's first modular space complex, the absolute pinnacle of Soviet engineering. Mir was originally designed for a 5-year lifespan. However, the legendary Soviet quality and an incredible margin of reliability allowed the station to operate in the harsh environment of space for 15 years. It was definitive proof that in the USSR, products were built to last for decades, not seasons. Over its 15-year journey, Mir completed 86,331 orbits around the Earth. It was here that Valery Polyakov set a record that remains unbroken to this day: 437 consecutive days in space. By 2001, the station had become a living monument to a fallen empire. Despite its immense durability, the Russian leadership made the difficult decision to focus all resources on the International Space Station project. To many, this felt like the voluntary abandonment of a national symbol of power to satisfy global interests. The final operation was a masterclass in ballistic engineering. The Progress M1-5 cargo ship delivered a series of braking pulses, sending the 140-ton giant into the atmosphere. Debris from Mir turned into blinding meteors, visible from the shores of Fiji. Approximately 20 tons of heat-resistant fragments now rest forever in the spacecraft cemetery in the southern Pacific Ocean. For the people of the former Soviet Union, the deorbiting of Mir was a personal tragedy, a final goodbye to a level of quality and scientific greatness that the modern world struggled to replicate. 4. Economic breakthrough: oil and taxes. The 13% phenomenon. Before 2001, taxes were progressive, reaching up to 30%. Businesses paid salaries under the table in envelopes. The introduction of a flat 13% income tax on January 1st was a shock. In the first year alone, Budget revenues from income tax jumped by 25% in real terms. This allowed Russia to start paying off its debts to the IMF. Oil analytics. The price of Urals crude in 2001 hovered around $22 to $23 per barrel. Today that seems low, but the cost of extraction was only $6 to $8. That massive margin flowed directly into the state budget. Russia felt the taste of extra money for the first time in a decade. The land shift. The adoption of the land code in October allowed for the legal purchase and sale of land for the first time. This created a real estate market in major cities and allowed Western giants like IKEA to finally enter the Russian market. 5. The Media War, the end of NTV and TV6. The night of April 14th. The takeover of NTV happened on a Saturday night to minimize protests. Special forces and new managers from Gazprom Media entered the building at 12 Koroleva Street. Journalists went on strike, but the broadcast signal was seized. The aftermath. This marked the end of the Fourth Estate. Iconic figures like Shenderovich and Mitkova scattered to other channels, but the spirit of 90s investigative journalism was suppressed. Putin made it clear. The television now worked for the state. 6. Tragedies. Lensk and Anna Politkovskaya. The destruction of Lensk. In May, an ice jam on the Lena River created a massive natural dam. The water level rose by 65 feet. The city was practically wiped off the map. This became Putin's first test as a crisis manager. Billions were allocated and the city was rebuilt in a single summer. A powerful PR movie for the administration. Anna Politkovskaya. In February 2001, Politkovskaya was detained in the North Caucasus. She had published an investigation into filtration camps and the conduct of federal troops. She directly accused the security forces of lawlessness. The conflict escalated until she began receiving open death threats. 2001 was the point where she transformed from a journalist into the enemy of the system #1. Her articles were read in the U.S. State Department, which infuriated the Kremlin. 7. Economic indicators. The exchange rate. The dollar started the year at 28 rubles and ended at 30. The average salary, roughly 3,240 rubles, only $110 a month. The price of gas, approximately 8 rubles per liter, or roughly $1 per gallon. The United States, 2001. The end of invulnerability. The year 2001 began in an atmosphere of unprecedented political tension. 1. Bush's political debut. The 537-vote president. The country was deeply divided from the very first day. George W. Bush took office on January 20, 2001, after 36 days of intense legal battles. The fate of the entire election was decided by just 537 votes in Florida. With half the country questioning his legitimacy, Bush began his term attempting to unite the nation through a massive $1.35 trillion tax cut designed to jumpstart a fading economy. His early focus was the No Child Left Behind education reform. At that moment, he planned to be remembered as a domestic reformer, not a wartime leader. 2. September 11th. Black Tuesday. This was the day that divided the life of every American into before and after. The attack was carried out by 19 suicide hijackers belonging to the Al-Qaeda organization. They were led by Osama bin Laden, who was hiding in Afghanistan. Most of the hijackers were citizens of Saudi Arabia. The timeline of the catastrophe was brutal. At 8:46 and 9:03 a.m., 2 planes struck the north and south towers of the World Trade Center. Both towers collapsed in less than 2 hours. At 9:37 a.m., a third plane struck the Pentagon, the very symbol of American military might. Finally, at 10:03 a.m., Flight 93 crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. The passengers, having learned of the other attacks via phone calls, fought back against the hijackers, preventing a strike on the Capitol or the White House. The final toll was 2,977 victims. These were the largest losses on American soil since the Civil War and Pearl Harbor. America ceased to be a safe island in a single day. Airports introduced rigorous screenings, and a wave of paranoia swept through society. 3. Biological terror. The white powder. Just a week after September 11th, a second wave of fear hit the United States. Letters containing anthrax spores began arriving at media offices and the desks of U.S. senators. 22 people were infected, and 5 died. The FBI launched the largest investigation in its history. The nation was paralyzed. People were afraid to even touch their own mailboxes. This convinced Americans that the war had arrived at their very doorstep. 4. The birth of the surveillance state. On October 26th, Bush signed the Patriot Act. This law fundamentally changed the American concept of privacy. Intelligence agencies were granted the power to monitor phone calls, read emails, and check bank records of any American without a warrant, based only on a suspicion of terrorism. This was the beginning of the National Security Agency as we know it today. Additionally, the Department of Homeland Security was created, marking the largest reorganization of the U.S. government in 50 years. 5. The start of the Great War, Afghanistan. On October 7th, Operation Enduring Freedom began. The U.S. military introduced the concept of network-centric warfare, where special forces on the ground used lasers to guide high-precision bombs dropped from 10 kilometers above. By the end of the year, preparations began at the base in Guantanamo Bay to hold unlawful combatants outside of the American legal system, a move that would later spark a massive international scandal. 6. The Enron collapse, an economic 9/11. In December, the largest energy company in the United States declared bankruptcy. It was revealed that the corporation was a massive financial pyramid scheme, hiding billions in losses through offshore accounts. Investors lost $74 billion. This destroyed public confidence in the stock market and led to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which still regulates global business today. 7. Life by the numbers. To understand the world of an American in 2001, look at the costs of daily life. The dollar was at the peak of its power against the euro and the yen. A gallon of gas cost only $1.46. For an American today, that sounds like a fairy tale. The average family income was about $42,000 a year. The digital world was just beginning. People lived without social media, Windows XP had just launched, and the first iPod appeared as an expensive $399 gadget for tech enthusiasts. Ukraine 2001. The point of no return and the visit of the Pope. By 2001, the political foundation of Ukraine had begun to fracture. A massive wiretapping scandal that ignited in late 2000 evolved into a full-scale political war throughout the following year. 1. The political thriller, Ukraine without Kuchma. The year began with the government literally reeling from public unrest. On March 9th, the protests reached a violent climax during the Battle for Kyiv. opposition forces attempted to block President Leonid Kuchma from reaching the Shevchenko monument, leading to brutal clashes with the Berkut Special Police. Hundreds were detained, and activists received significant prison sentences. While the authorities maintained control, the country realized that the monolith of power had been shaken. During this time, the influence of Western foundations, including those of George Soros, became a major point of contention for the administration. The narrative of external management took hold in the media, accusing the opposition of using foreign grants to destabilize the regime. This period laid the groundwork for the future confrontation between pro-Western and pro-Russian forces. 2. The resignation of Yushchenko, the birth of a symbol. On April 26th, the Ukrainian parliament voted to dismiss the cabinet of Viktor Yushchenko. To many in the West and within the country, he was the face of economic reform. His departure from the prime minister's office marked the unofficial beginning of his presidential campaign. As he left, he famously told his supporters, "I am leaving so that I may return." At rallies outside the parliament, people openly wept. Yushchenko transformed from a technocrat into a symbol of hope, uniting everyone from liberal businessmen to political radicals. 3. The visit of Pope John Paul II, 5 days that shook the world. Between June 23rd and 27th, an event occurred that served as a powerful diplomatic shield for the administration. Pope John Paul II visited Kiev and Lviv. Despite fierce protests from the Moscow Patriarchate, millions turned out to see the pontiff. In Lviv alone, roughly 1.5 million people gathered at the Hippodrome. It was a massive geopolitical signal. The Pope quoted Ukrainian poets and recognized Ukraine as a European power, momentarily lifting the country out of international isolation. 4. Tragedy over the Black Sea. The S-200 missile. On October 4th, an event occurred that nearly cost Kuchma his presidency and severely damaged relations with Israel. During air defense exercises in Crimea, an S-200 missile system lost its practice target and locked onto a civilian Tu-154 airliner flying from Tel Aviv. For an entire week, the government denied the obvious truth. President Kuchma's remark that accidents happen all over the world and we are not the first or the last infuriated the public. 78 people perished. While the Minister of Defense eventually resigned, the reputation of the Ukrainian military was devastated. 5. The nuclear echo, dismantling the shield. In 2001, Ukraine reached the final chapter of its nuclear past, fulfilling its obligations to the United States. On October 30th, in the Mykolaiv region, the last silo launcher for the SS-24 intercontinental ballistic missiles was destroyed. Ukraine officially ceased to be a nation capable of launching nuclear weapons from underground silos. This process was funded by the Nunn-Lugar program and was closely monitored by American inspectors on the ground. 6. The prelude to disaster. Although the infamous Sknyliv airshow crash would not occur until the following year, 2001 was defined by a state of chaos and severe underfunding within the Ukrainian Air Force. Pilots had critically low flight hours, and equipment was being pushed to its absolute limits, setting the stage for future tragedies. 7. Economics and population. In December 2001, the only comprehensive census in the history of independent Ukraine was conducted. The data showed that the population of Ukraine stood at 457,000 people. The exchange rate remained stable at approximately 5.4 H hryvnia to the US dollar. A liter of gasoline cost about 2.2 hryvnia. For an American perspective, this was approximately $1.50 per gallon. However, against an average monthly salary of only $58, the cost of living remained a crushing burden for the majority of the population. Pause 1.5. 2001 was the moment when the world finally lost its illusion of safety. From the takeover of television networks in Moscow to the smoldering ruins of the World Trade Center in New York, and the fierce political battles on the streets of Kiev, history was written in blood, money, and bold decisions. We do not seek to sugarcoat the past. We show it exactly as it was: complex, brutal, and utterly captivating. Pause 1.0s. This was only one chapter of a much larger chronicle. Ahead of us lie new years, new challenges, and the hard truths that many would prefer to keep silent. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you value an honest look at history. We are moving forward. Stay with us.